Dear friends, I'm operator Starsky, and this is day 1125 of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Russian ceasefire: the terrorists killed a family in Kyiv. What is the purpose behind alleged Ukrainian incursion of Belgorod? Ukraine's special forces destroyed 4 Russian helicopters, and American envoy doesn't consider Putin a bad guy. My dear friends, this is the Frontline Focus. Let's roll. Yesterday, officials from US and Ukraine met in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to discuss a possible halt on long-range strikes and maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea. Today, the US representatives will have a discussion with the Russian terrorists. Reuters reported that the US will also discuss with Russia the possibility of returning kidnapped Ukrainian minors and potential line of control. Apparently, they were talking about freezing the front line. In the meantime, despite Putin's official order not to strike Ukrainian civilian infrastructure that still can be found on his official website, massive Russian drone strikes against Ukraine's infrastructure continue. Yesterday, such strike in Kyiv unfortunately took life of a whole family. A 5-year-old Nicole and her both parents were killed by Russian drone that Putin ordered not to launch against Ukraine last week. The Russian invaders have intensified their use of drones and missiles to penetrate Ukraine's air defenses. They now launch between 150 and 200 drones in single overnight attacks, which is a significant increase from the last year. This escalation aims to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses and suggests that Russia currently faces no shortage in drone production or components. Also, Russian invaders have intensified offensive operations in areas such as Kupiansk, Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, and Pokrovsk. At the same time, numerous Russian bloggers yesterday reported that Ukrainian armed forces have incurred the Belgorod Oblast, taking control over the village of Demidovka. While the combat is reported inside of this village, some of the footage indicate logistical problems faced by the Russian terrorists, such as bridges destroyed in this area, which makes it harder for Russians to deliver personnel and their equipment to the Russian positions. What is the possible reason behind this incursion? According to Ukrainian retired General Romanenko, the Russian invaders are planning to establish a buffer zone in the northern part of Sumy Oblast to prevent Ukrainian defenders from incurring the Kursk Oblast. For this reason, we can see intensified combat in Belgorod, while Russians are forced to stretch their reserves from Kursk Oblast and possibly other occupied regions of Ukraine to cover this gap. While Russians are facing new challenges in frames of the war they've started, Ukrainian Special Operation Forces revealed a footage of destroying 4 Russian helicopters at once. The strike took place in Belgorod, where 2 Ka-52 and 2 Mi-8 helicopters on the ground were hit by Ukrainian artillery. Ka-52 is an attack helicopter and Mi-8 used for carrying cargo and troops. All 4 helicopters were hit by Ukrainian HIMARS using fragmentation shells, dramatically improving their flying capabilities, because these choppers can now fly all the way after the notorious Russian warship. Now, let's talk about the fresh cases of misinformation and distorted reality. Mike Waltz, the US security advisor, misinformed the media about the successful negotiations with Russia, which allegedly resulted in Russians stopping their strikes on the Ukrainian infrastructure. On one hand, he's right, I mean in his reality, because when you peek outside your window in your apartment in Washington, D.C., you really don't notice Ukrainian houses being hit by Russian missiles and drones. On the other hand, when you experience such strikes in Kyiv, you can tell that those negotiations simply don't work because Russians lie. The reason the White House keeps ignoring the daily footage of the Russian strikes taking place all over Ukraine, since Putin's promise to stop those strikes, remains a mystery. The US envoy Steve Witkoff, in his interview to some of the biggest supporters of Russia in the US, Tucker Carlson, admitted that he doesn't consider Putin a bad guy. He also said that the war always involves more than one person, which I completely agree with. There's always an attacker and a defender, no matter how hard you try to distort reality. Also, Mr. Witkov mentioned the problematic regions of Ukraine where majority of people voted to become parts of Russia. I don't remember official Ukraine organizing such referendums, and I also don't really understand how come, for example, people in Zaporizhia voted to become part of Russia if Zaporizhia wasn't even occupied. My friends, this is a clear case of distorted reality, where the power of imagination can literally change international borders and historic events, in the head of a single person, of course, but nonetheless, it's still impressive. I couldn't fantasize on such a scale even when I was 8. Apparently, my childhood was really boring. And switching to our favorite topic, my friends, the almighty Russian cringe. The Russians published the most recent data on Ukraine's losses since the beginning of the Russian invasion. Oh boy, where do I start? Are you ready? I hope you are ready. So, according to the Russian authorities, Ukraine lost more than 1 million soldiers, and that is more than 100% of Ukraine's armed forces and National Guard combined as of 2022. The fact is that Russians planned to eliminate all those men and women back in 2022, but when they failed, they decided no, they should be defeated anyways, even if it's on paper. My second theory is that apparently some of those Ukrainian servicemen were eliminated several times. For example, Russia is the very first country on our planet that documented the unexplainable phenomenon of respawning Ukrainian generals. Some of them were reportedly killed several times, like legendary Ukrainian General Budanov and General Zaluzhny. But despite all their numerous deaths, they just keep showing up on TV. Next, 22,500 tanks and armored vehicles. That is impressive, my friends. Apparently, they were also destroying NATO tanks, some were in a different country without NATO being even aware of that. The truth is, as of 2022, Ukraine only had approximately 1,200 tanks, with only about half of them being combat-worthy, and approximately 3,000 armored vehicles. According to the open sources, Ukraine received roughly 860 tanks and 7,000 armored vehicles from its allies. It makes it roughly 12,000 tanks and armored vehicles combined. What the Russians are trying to say is that at this point, Ukraine has absolutely zero tanks and armored vehicles left on its territory, and in addition to this, each of them has been destroyed twice. Or, considering that all European NATO countries combined have about 11,000 tanks as of today, plus Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles, it means that Russia managed to wipe out all the tanks in Europe. What an impressive imagination. Now, 659 airplanes. Let's refer to open sources. Literally check your ChatGPT right now if you don't trust me. As of 2022, Ukraine had 94 combat airplanes. The approximate number of airplanes delivered to Ukraine this and last year is approximately 85. I have a version. Apparently, 94 Ukrainian airplanes mated with 85 NATO airplanes and gave birth to several hundred, those tiny combat aircraft. And now I understand what they mean when they say that Ukraine uses new generation airplanes. Apparently that's the thing. So next time some Douglas McCarlson tells you that Ukrainians lost gazillion tanks and 10 gazillion people, quietly pick up your phone and call a mental institution. I mean, there's nothing bad about having a good imagination, but let's be honest, living in a parallel reality is actually a mental disorder. With that, I wish you all a beautiful day, my dear friends. Please subscribe to stay informed about the most important updates and share this content to help Ukraine be heard. I'll see you in the comments. I'm Operator Starsky. As always, be safe.